Welcome to Red Team TV, sponsored by Red Team Thinking. Bad leaders react, good leaders plan, and great leaders think. Each week, we bring you new ideas and insights from business leaders, military leaders, and thought leaders. Ideas and insights that will help you think more deeply and lead more effectively, so that you can better navigate your complex world. Here again are your hosts, best-selling business author and top-rated leadership speaker Bryce Hoffman, and former Royal Air Force Wing Commander and business agility coach Marcus Dimbleby.
Hello and welcome to another episode of our show. I am Bryce Hoffman, president of Red Team Thinking and author of the book Red Teaming, broadcasting to you from sunny California. I am joined, as always, by my excellent partner,
Marcus Dimbleby. Hello there, broadcasting to you from sunny London for a change, which is nice at this time of year. Great to be here on another show with the good old Bryce Hoffman.
And we have a really cool guest today, Jayson Coil. Jayson is the head of our fire practice at Red Team Thinking, and he can explain what that is. But Marcus, tell us a little bit about Jayson.
I will. Let me shed some light on Jayson Coil. So Jayson is a US Army veteran with over 25 years of experience in wildland and structural firefighting. In addition to overseeing the operations of an all-hazard fire agency operating in some of the most complex terrain in the United States, he also serves as an operations chief on a national Type 1 incident management team, where his focus is strategic and operational plan development, and he spent over 2 years deployed on incidents. Jayson has completed a postgraduate study in leadership and is currently pursuing a PhD in performance psychology, where his concentration is on the role that applied critical thinking plays on decision quality in complex environments. I can't wait to have a conversation about all of this.
Jayson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bryce. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about your background and how your experiences on the fire lines led you to become interested in applied critical thinking and decision quality and distributed decision making, all these cool things that we love talking about.
Yeah, well, man, when I think about my experiences and how they led me there, I think of a long list of mistakes that I have made over the years. and
join the club.
It's funny too, because the mistakes that I made, I think, and maybe everybody follows this kind of a path, if you will. It's initially mistakes were made because I didn't know better. And then pretty soon the mistakes were made because I thought I knew best.
Ouch.
And those were the ones that really stuck with me. And those actually are the ones I think that really drove me to want to figure out a better way to do it. And when I say it, I mean lead in that environment, lead especially in those complex incidents. And that led me to be involved in some instances, had some bad outcomes, places where we lost firefighters. I looked at it and I said, we got to do better. We don't control everything in our environment. We have to accept that. We have to accept that the plan we made the night before isn't going to, not only is it not going to be right about everything, is that it's probably not the best plan. And the people that are out there executing it have strengths and expertise and ability to adapt to unforeseen change, that when I take that away from them through a rigid planning process, we lose the ability to be successful. So those are kind of some of the ways that I advance and continue to advance my thinking through a series of not so bright ideas that I've used to improve my system.
Wow. And you're making decisions in some of the most high stress environments imaginable. I mean, as most people probably are aware, though not as acutely as you, the nature of wildland fires has changed pretty drastically over the past decade, has it not?
I think it has. I mean, and when I say that I think it has, one of the main reasons that I arrive at that is because there's decisions that I made based on experience before that when I apply to a situation that I think is similar, recognizing that it may or may not be similar, but that I think is similar enough that we should have success. In the last few years, we have a difficult time having success with that. And that has caused us to have to be like, wait a minute, this learning from experience is important. And we talk about slides in our slide tray, which probably need to think of a different way to explain that, since nowadays slide trays are a little hard to find. But
I understand the metaphor, though, is that we have these things that we go back to constantly. But like in your line of work, the size of fires has changed, the frequency of fires has changed, the pace of spread of fires have changed, and so not only do you have bigger fires, you have them happening simultaneously, so there's less resources, and that's got to make your job as a commander who's in charge of marshaling all these resources, all these firefighters, all these equipment from different agencies, federal, state, local, and all this stuff, just incredibly complex.
It's complex, and it reminds me too. So a little bit about specifically what I do when I'm on those fires is the system we use. It's a hierarchical system. It's very similar and was based on military rank structure. And there's an incident commander who is basically hired by the different agencies that are being affected by the fire, the hurricane, the shuttle recovery effort, whatever it is. And they delegate authority to managing that incident to the incident commander. And then there is an operations section chief, or 2 or 3 of them. That is the role that I fill, that it's our job to take that broad guidance, that leader's intent, if you will, from the host unit, and distill it down into objectives, and then execute on those objectives to achieve a successful outcome. So embedded within that is 2 processes that are distinct but complementary, and that we used to try to just apply one set of rules to. So our planning process is, like in the military, be like their MDMP, the military decision-making process in the U.S. military. And
right.
And so that process it's necessarily a linear process. You have a finite amount of time to develop a plan that you're going to utilize the next day. And we develop a written plan every day. We have a bunch of people helping us do that, but we execute on that plan. And in there, we have task, purpose, and end state for each one of the different portions of the fire that we call divisions, and how they're going to execute in that part to accomplish their piece of the objective, or, in the military, probably subordinate lines of effort to achieve that, the larger line of effort. And they were like, you know what? These fires are lasting longer. They're lasting longer. The situations aren't as obvious. We need to become more strategic. I think we could say that we have a lot of people that definitely demonstrate tactical excellence. So if we're tactically sound, let's just scale that up. Let's scale up that same level of thinking, that same type of process that we use on the tactical level, up to the strategic level, and we should be successful. So what we call strategy is probably more akin to operational design. It's that phase, that piece between the larger strategy of all the different fires that are being managed and the plan that's being executed. So we tried that first. I have a very vivid memory of the first time that I decided to work on improving how we presented a strategy. Because we need buy-in from everybody, right? We need the people we're working for. If we're not going to go directly after something, we need for them to understand why we're not going to go directly after it. When maybe the best course of action right now is no action, and when the best course of action is just immediate action. And because there's risk with each one of those. And they while they may not assume the physical risk or the risk to force, they certainly assume the risk to mission. The first time I did this, and I had a bunch of big heads in there, and from all the way up to the region, so in the Southwest United States, and I presented my strategy, and I had pulled on every bit of predictive science that we had available, modeling on the fires. I met the incident meteorologist look at the near-term fire behavior. We had long-term climatological looks, had it all together and presented it, and I asked if there's any questions. And there's no questions. So, me being proud of myself, like I am lots of times when I work on something for a long time, I'm like, man, I nailed it. And so They all walked out of the room, and I'm feeling like, yep, everybody's aligned with what we got going on. Everybody's going to be behind us as we move forward. And my incident commander, love her to death. Her name's B. And she looked at me and she said, they didn't understand a word you said. I was like, wow. And it was a very humbling moment. And, a few things I learned from that I'm sure I've had to relearn them a few times since then. It was about 10 years ago, but was that you can present something and you can have this whole narrative that you're going on, but if people don't understand what you're saying, then it's meaningless. It can be the coolest words together. Basically, in a fire way, it was the same as people saying, hey, we're going to do the right things for the right reasons, and we're going to make sure that we focus on those words don't mean much. And neither did mine, even though I thought they had meaning, because I didn't communicate any of that meaning. So,
well, this is why storytelling is so important, right?
right.
is it doesn't matter how good your analysis is. It doesn't matter how penetrating the insights that you find are. It doesn't matter how great your strategy is. If you can't communicate it to people in a way that they not only can understand it, but they can connect with it, they can resonate with it, then you've lost the opportunity. And it's like, this goes back to caveman days, right? I mean, you think about this. Back when we were all, walking around as hunters and gatherers, if you had said to people, look, there's a bunch of brilliant red berries over there, we shouldn't eat them, they're poisonous. Most people would have quickly forgotten that and eaten the red berries and died. But if you were the chief and you said, hey, everybody remember Grug? Grug was such a great guy. We all loved Grug. He entertained us so much. And here's poor Grug's wife and child sitting here around the fire with us today. Where's Grug? Well, Grug ate the red berries. And now Grug is gone. Don't be like Grug. Don't leave your wife and child here without you. Don't eat the red berries. Now that sticks with people because now every time everyone looks at the red berries, they're thinking about poor Grug.
Yeah, and I was just thinking to follow on from that as well, you've got to have this ability to check people's understanding as well. It's not just a matter of asking that simple question, do you get it? Because you're going to get those head bobbing, oh yeah, we understand, and they don't, because nobody also wants to put their hand up and be that guy in the room who thinks that everyone else gets it except them. There's never a stupid question, but people always feel that, and therefore they don't want to ask that question. And therefore everybody walks out of the room, and you know that half of them haven't understood it. But it's having that capability to extract that information from them to make sure that what you've conveyed has been understood. And as Bryce said, if you do it in a story, it's relatable, but then also having that ability to check and engage them to make sure they know what they're going to be doing and understand what the intent is from that commander's intent and the mission intent from the beginning.
Yeah. And you know what? In this case, I thought that I was smart enough to figure it out on my own, because I pulled in the data from all the different people and I compiled it, and then I presented. I talked to everybody about what we're going to do. And so the implied assumption there is, or the unstated assumption there is, that me going out and gathering all the pieces of information, I gathered up all the right information, and I was considering everything that needed to be considered in the execution of this plan. And all I needed to do was pitch that to them. And then they would be like, cool, Jason's figured it all out.
Oh, well, this goes back to Adam Smith's rational choice theory too, right?
Right.
That this theory that people believed for the last 3 centuries, that human beings are fundamentally rational actors, and that if we're provided with enough information and the right information, we will always make a good decision. And that's the theory that folks like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Gary Klein, all of these experts in cognitive psychology have just proven is totally false. That's how we wish we made decisions. And as you both know, the way we actually make decisions is influenced by this dizzying array of cognitive biases and blind spots that skew those decisions. And if you're not if you're not accounting for that, then the best information in the world is going to be distorted by that imperfect lens that we all have.
Yeah.
When we look at the
absolutely.
world.
And I think, as Jayson mentioned earlier, what worked before doesn't work anymore because of this complex environment we're in. And we talk about VUCA H, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity that you're facing now at the front line, that 10 years ago was a very different but similar situation. Do you think that, okay, well, what worked then works now? And it clearly isn't doing. So these things are evolving at such a pace that you need that frontline adaptability. As you said, and it's that strategic intent, but are you enabling that decision-making capability to be devolved down as far as possible so those smart people at the front line can react accordingly when it's immediate and needed? Otherwise, they can take the time and respond and plan and replan accordingly to meet the requirements they're facing day by day.
You're so right, Marcus. I mean, here in California, a couple of years ago, after one of the big series, not just one big fire, after we had 3 catastrophic fires at once, our governor came on television and told the people of the state, hey, look, you need to understand something. We've reached a point now where we can't save everything. That there are too many fires happening too frequently, and our resources are stretched too thin, that every fire command team has got to make those types of difficult choices you're talking about, Jayson, about what gets saved and what doesn't get saved. Because the days in which every house is going to get saved, everyone's going to get evacuated, everything's going to be fine, are over. And that's a hard change.
Such a tough call, because you all want, it goes back to what we talked about before, what are we choosing not to do? Not to save property, not to save, wow. And then to not do that, but then to try and save too many things, and then you fail because you've spread yourself too thin. That is such a hard call for a leader at the front line, Jayson. It really is.
And I think that you guys have hit on one of the things that kind of keeps me up at night now and going into this next fire season, which is, by all indications, is probably going to be another one for the record books. But is that, so 2 things, right? So we have people that are on these incidents that have been successful in the past, and something drives them. They came to service because they wanted to make a difference. You spend 2 or 3 years out there digging lines to nowhere, getting things done and having it burned over the next day. And how fulfilling is that going to be? It's dirty, nasty work. The people that we depend on, the hotshot crews, there's nothing sexy about that. But they go out and do it, and they do it well. But they do it well because there's something that rewards them in it. And as these situations change where we're less successful, how much of a reward are people going to find? And then when we have, we have right now, a difficult time filling fire positions, which has never been a thing in the past, how much it comes back to what they don't get to satisfy them when they go out on those difficult incidents. It's not like they want it easy. They just want the opportunity to be successful.
But they physically can't because of the complexity of the situations they're facing now. Yeah, it's devastating, isn't it? And the impact that has on their morale, their intent, their wish to do the right thing when you can't, has got to have an impact. And as you as a leader commanding over that, enabling that capability and trying to foster it, it is tough, real tough.
This is a broad issue too. I mean, if you think about it, guys, this is what's happening with COVID too. As people all over the world kind of realize it, everything that all the levers that get pulled, it's still here, it's still spreading. You get more and more people just throwing their hands up in the air and giving up because they're not getting, they're not getting the reward for doing the right thing. And that's hard. I don't, if any of you have know the study that I'm going to reference here, who are listening or watching, put a note in the comments so that I can find this. Somebody told me once there was a study done, and I got to look up. I don't know who did it. Back in the 60s or 70s, when they could still be cruel to animals, unfortunately, where some cognitive psychologists had the question of, for decades, people have done experiments where they punish animals to make them do the right thing. You get a shock if you do the wrong thing, you get a reward if you do the right thing. And some particularly cruel scientists said, what happened if you just give animals random shocks constantly? And what they found is they just stop trying. They just lie down in their cage and get shocked and don't even react ultimately because the brain can't figure out what the right thing to do is anymore. And unfortunately, with all of the kind of dominoes toppling at once in the world today, I think there's a lot of situations where people find themselves into something similar.
The other thing is that, I mean, this truly is a complex adaptive system, this fire world. And so, we have everything that occurs on the physical side, and then we have the socially constructed environment around it, whether it's the houses that are moving further into the interface, whether it's the political leadership that demands action, that wants to blame it on something that somebody did or didn't do back in the day. And then we have individuals' perception of risk and individuals' tolerance for operating in VUCA, in ambiguous environments. And then we put it all together and we think that we can write a recipe to fix it, and that we can do that and then tell someone how to fix it. We're high if we think that. The best we can do is give people decision space in the field and let them know what those sideboards are.
Yeah.
Because we're not there. And we don't, like David Snowden said, right? If we don't probe, sense, and respond when we're dealing with complexity, then the assumption is that we know what we're dealing with and we know how to solve it. And we don't. And we can't script it.
That is it, Jayson. You nailed it there. If you're in these complex adaptive system problems, but you're trying to give an ordered plan to deliver the solution, which we know doesn't work, you have to be probing, and you can't probe from up on high. It has to be those down at the front line, able to do that, able to sense, and then have the empowerment and enabled to respond accordingly with the support from above, I guess. And if you're applying that hierarchical military structure, how does that work? Where have you seen the sort of pecking order start to, have cracks form quickly?
Well, I think part of it is that, so I'm going to go back a ways here, but if we start with, there's a fire called the Peshtigo fire that was up around in the Wisconsin, I think is where it was, but it was in the Midwest, in the same time as the Great Chicago Fire. Burned something like 500,000 acres.
Yeah.
Destroyed a bunch of houses, destroyed communities.
Yeah. Same day as the Chicago Fire.
Yeah, exactly. Same day,
I believe. Yeah.
And so the Chicago Fire communities came together to help Chicago, and codes were changed and everything changed. The fire was just an unfortunate circumstance. Fast forward to 1910 and the big burn, when the fires burned over 1 million acres across the northwestern side of the United States and wiped out complete towns. I think it was Wallace, Idaho was one of the towns. But then we got to fix something. We got to change it. So, 1916, 1917, new policy on fires. And then we had this thing called the 10 a.m. rule, where the next day by 10 a.m., all fires that are detected should be suppressed. And we said, yep, we got it. And then a couple of years happened where we blow it. And then we're like, we just need more people. We need more people. We need to get there quicker. So to get there quicker, we got to find them faster. So we need more lookout towers, and we need more fire roads, and we need more people to go put them out. So fortunately, about that time, the 30s, you had the CCC was available. They built fire roads, built towers, and put out lots of fires. So we had a system that, it worked. Got worse again in the late 40s. We're like smoke jumpers. If only we could insert people by airplane into these remote fires. We could get there early and put them out quicker. And pretty soon, you got to come to the realization that things keep changing. What we did with the 10 a.m. rule, the fuels didn't go away. They just, you instead of one fire burning 1,000 acres every 100 years, you have 10 fires within there that, until they get on the right day, and maybe only burn an acre or two because we get there at the perfect time to put them out. But the one fire that starts on that bad day, now it can run, the Soberanes in California there, 3 entire drainages above, huge drainages above Highway 1. And now they're all the same age class brush because they all burned at the same time. So what's going to happen? This homogeneous growth of everything until pretty soon you get a drought year and there's enough dead and all that manzanita and everything else that grows there. And then you burn, maybe this next time it's 4 drainages or 5 drainages. We just need to realize that we don't control all the inputs that are necessary to solve the problem. And we need to look at new ways to do it besides just throwing more people at it. More money, more people, it's not going to work.
And it's not just the climate and environmental factors either. You've now got all these social factors that you touched on that are impacting your job in crazy ways. I know, because we've talked about this, that here up where I live, a couple years ago, you had international drug cartels interfering with your firefighting efforts at a fire that you were one of the commanders on, right? I mean, coming in and forcing firefighters at gunpoint to use their water trucks to water their marijuana fields.
Yeah, and it was interesting because on that incident, we're initially, my brain, so we're still thinking how we can put the fire out. Hey, there's still this active piece of fire there we need to work on. And it wasn't me. Somebody else is like, well, let's just pull out of that part. I looked at my mom. Yeah, let's. But we're programmed to fix the problem. And you're right. We're trying to fix the problem in an environment where we don't control everything. And it's interesting because in our environment, our leadership approach has to be that people willingly act in accordance with what it is that we want. Because, like I said, it's decentralized. I mean, that's a tenet of any decentralized leadership. They need to be able to do that. And we get frustrated when they don't. We being, the other people, myself and other people like me in the role that I play. And if we want that, then we need to take their perspectives and capabilities into consideration in the first place. And it can't just be that we need to accomplish this. Hey, it says we're supposed to, get all the way around this fire. We need to put that section out. It needs to be the fact that we're like, hey, what are these guys worried about? Well, they're worried about the fact that they're squished between a high crime area and a potential fire, and they don't know where they can go, and they can't get enough roadblocks in place to keep the place safe. We shouldn't ask people to operate in that environment, but we do.
Well, this gets down to distributed decision making, and that is a topic that we will talk about when we get back from this short break. Stay tuned.
Does your organization have a red team culture? Is it an innovative, learning, and resilient culture that is continually improving, continually adapting, and continually evolving to meet the new challenges and opportunities each day brings? Or is it reactive, siloed and hamstrung by command and control leadership that doesn't like to be challenged or questioned? Does your organization encourage diversity of thought and ensure that everyone's voice is heard? Or does it silence dissent and promote those who toe the line? Take our free assessment and find out how your organization rates. There's a link to it in the notes below. Let's see how you score.
Welcome back. During the break, Jayson, you were sharing a really cool story about a fire that you worked on. Can you share that with our audience as well?
Yeah. So it's just, I think it's representative of the challenge that we face more and more these days. So there is with whether it's climate change, whether it's beetles that kill the trees, whatever. There's a lot of places in the Western United States where we go on fires that there's a lot of dead trees, and so you're the person that's managing that area. That a lot of the local resources that respond to, if you work for the Forest Service, say they work for you. You're accountable for them. If you're that district ranger or that forest supervisor, and so you get a fire that starts from lightning and one of those areas where there's a lot of snags, there's a lot of dead standing trees, and you can see the risk to firefighters that exists by putting them out in those snag patches, we call them. And on one particular incident, there was not very far, a year, 2 years earlier, very near where this fire started, there was a fatality from a tree strike of a firefighter. So a tree fell and killed the firefighter. And unfortunately, it's one of the more dangerous things we deal with is trees. So this occurs, and now you have a new fire there. And on one hand, you have aggressive firefighters who want to go in there and put it out. They say, yeah, we can go in there and we get it. And there's good rationale for that, right? You enter an environment that's higher risk, but shorter duration, and then you remove the problem, at least for that day. And then one of the other alternatives is you back up to where we call them the values, just generically speaking, whether it's a cell tower, a infrastructure for a railroad or a community, it's values. So we have, and if the values could be threatened, we call them values at risk. So you look at the best spot between where the fire is and those values, and then you decide that that's where you're going to put your line. So normally when you're up in the Northern Rockies, everything's the values are usually in the valley. And so you go down along the edge of those values, start putting in line, and you use mechanized equipment to do it. You cut down a bunch of trees right along the edge, improve stuff, low risk to firefighters. And then you got to burn it out though, right? That fire's going to come down. And if you wait until the fire picks a day, if it's got a mile to go, say, and it doesn't move incrementally, there's days when the wind comes up and it moves a lot. There's days. And so you're looking at all those variables, and then you're saying, hey, you know what? If it's getting closer to the end of August, and the closer you get towards the end of August in that country, the more dry cold fronts you get. The more dry cold fronts you get, the more heavy winds you get with no precipitation with them. So you're seeing all that in your head, and then the team that's managing that fire, maybe this fire's been going for a couple of weeks, and so it's continuing to move down off the mountain. They've got this line in around there. Sooner or later, you got to light it. And then that's you lighting it. If you don't light it, the fire comes across the line and does damage. And, some ways it's kind of all for naught. And so if you do light it though, and your fire causes a problem, for whatever reason, you're more accountable. And I don't know if you're really more accountable, but the perception is certainly that you're more accountable. And now you have that person that made a decision in the first place that was a very well-intentioned decision to keep people out of harm's way, that has been getting beat up in that community for the last however long, 2 or 3 weeks, because of smoke, because the fire is still there, because of everything that's going on with it. And now maybe they're more tolerant for risk. And now you have a team that comes in there that says, hey, we just got called in here to manage this fire. The other team's done their time and transitioned out. And we got to light this, but we don't want to light it. We don't feel like it's a good spot. We want to improve it. We want to go. So it creates a problem. And I think one of the main reasons it creates a problem is that at that initial moment when we make a decision, it's very difficult to perceive it, like strategy versus budget.
Yeah.
Right. You make strategic decisions and you're pushing those way out. So it's fun to talk about cool things you're going to do in your strategic plan. But that year when you have to allocate budget resources to meet the objectives in your strategic plan,
right,
those trade-offs are a lot more real. We're going to fund R&D, or we're going to put more money into this, and so that happens on fires too. And then unfortunately, the narrative to the public a lot of times is this looking back. Well, you should have just went in there and got it. You should have just done this. You should have just done that.
Good old hindsight.
Yeah. Everybody's an expert mind, suddenly too.
What we should do is we should make sure that we're engaged in processes that allow us to surface all of the potential implications, so we make a decision that is at least considerate of all the different impacts.
Right.
And it's still a lot of uncertainty, and there's still a lot of it, but there's certain things we do know. And having a frame where you put all those together, and so you can look at them and you can have a conversation about them, to me, that's something that we can certainly do a better job of.
Well, I think that's what we try to do with Red Team Thinking, is provide that frame. And honestly, when I was listening to you talk about that, Jayson, I was thinking how similar this is to the situation that the U.S. military found itself in Iraq, when the what they thought had been a relatively easy victory was suddenly unraveling into this massive insurgency. And they realized that a lot of the reasons why that was happening had to do with a failure to look at this problem in a truly three-dimensional way, to look at the problem not just from a military point of view, but from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, from a point of view of Maslow's law, all these different things. And so a lot of the tools and techniques that they developed for decision support red teaming that we've then evolved for red team thinking are designed to help decision makers look at the second and third order effects of their decisions, look at how the problem and how the decisions that they're contemplating are going to look from the perspective of other stakeholders. Look at how those stakeholders have a role to play in the success or failure of the plan, and look at how different ways that the plan could unfold in the future and how those could impact all these variables. And it's really trying to get at that interconnectivity, which it sounds like what you're talking about very much on these fire lines.
And it's a lot of, yes. And it's a lot of what led me to start looking for different alternatives to the way we were doing it. A good friend of mine, another ops chief, his name's Todd Abel. He and I went and did a project that we went around in the Northern Rockies and in the Southwest and looked at how risk was communicated and some of the different challenges with risk communication, both up and down. And then we wrote a document that we provided for everybody to look at it. And it wasn't our lessons; it was the issues that people were facing in the field. And that was certainly one of the main things that came out of it. Is like you have this hotshot crew that's frustrated because in this case, say the hotshot crew wants to go in there and get that fire when it's little, and they understand that they're going to assume risk. There's a certain amount of experience that everyone has to have to lead that crew. There's a certain amount of experience that they have to be members of that crew. The amount of training they have to have. They understand what happens if someone gets struck by a tree, and if they want to go in there and get it, then they are probably, I would submit, aware of the physical risks. Now, if going in there and getting it means that we're going to go in and get the next 10 or the next 100 into those snag patches, and we're going to be dealing with the same problem and exposing people more and more, so like the aggregate risk is something that as an organization or as a leader you're not willing to take on. I get that. That's different, but that's where this process comes in, right? That's right. Where getting people on board to surface all that stuff. It doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong. It means that we have different perspectives of looking on this because each one of us is accountable for a different outcome. And I think at least, well, I think that matters. And I'll tell you why I think that matters. So on our incident management team, I used to run the meetings. And the way I would run the meetings is I would start these at the beginning of the day. And then right before we go out and we go to our operational brief where we brief everybody. And then at the end of the day, I would run the meeting and we'd close everybody out. And I realized that it just wasn't very helpful.
Right.
And so now what we do, and it's funny because we stumbled upon this in the COVID environment because we had to, but we're in different places. And so we get on Zoom and I'd have a map pulled up and I go around the divisions and I tell somebody, hey, walk us through your division and tell us what you got going on there and what your challenges are you're facing. And so they would have to articulate that as they're going around. So that's hard. Speaking to a map when somebody else is using the pointer, you get good at knowing your piece of ground. And I got better at appreciating the context that they were operating in. And I would say that took 3/4 of the meeting to do it that way. And then I'd ask them, hey, tell me the problem. I wouldn't say define the problem. I said, what's the biggest problem that you see in the next operational period with meeting the objectives? He said, okay. And then we talk about developing an approach. And I used to make him where, hey, what's your guys' plan? What's your probability of success? So I tell somebody to develop a plan, and then I ask them what the probability of success is. Well, I guess if you thought you were shit, you'd say, this is my plan and my probability of success is 0. But that's not the people we get out there. And that's not the leaders that we get on type 1 incident management teams. And so their probability of success was always very high. And I was like, this is a useless exercise. So
optimism bias.
Yeah, right. And you set them up. You set them up for failure. And it would usually start something like, well, if I get the resources that I said I need, and so they put a couple of qualifiers in there to give them a little space, right? And who wouldn't?
Yep.
Then
CYA.
This. Yep. But then you go around the fire and you do that, and then you let them know that even though going through this process is better, I understand that your answer is provisional. This is day 1.
Right.
You don't have it all figured out. And I shouldn't set the expectation to create a false anchor that you do. If I let you have space to come up with a plan, an immediate plan, and then build on that plan, and it's okay. It's not contrary to how we quantify success for you to come in and change something because you have new knowledge or because you're working with those crews that are out in the field and they've helped you see something better. we've improved our decision quality. We've improved the outcome of the incident. And so those are just different ways we applied that up and down that I think have really had value.
So many points, so many great points there, Jayson. I'll try and hit on a few. Now, this is what we're talking here is old school project management. This linear concept that things will happen consequentially in the agreed timeline with all the constraints understood. It's just BS. It doesn't happen anymore. And whether you're fighting fires, whether you're delivering software, doesn't make any difference. Building a house, these things are changing so dynamically. And you nailed it. That word you said then, you've got to give them space. And for me, giving those people who are going to be executing that plan the space to think, to discuss with you, to educate you on what they're thinking and vice versa, and to look at it holistically and see what might happen. Because you said day one, what comes on day two? We can only guess. We can only look at the weather forecast. We can only use a bit of experience, but we don't know until it's here. And if we go linear and rigid, then that's when bad things are going to happen. So this flexibility in thinking, in understanding, in discussion, it goes back to the old planning up front without the plan is crucial.
And that provisionality too, that you mentioned, the ability to make provisional decisions. I think back to, the Israeli defense intelligence folks that have their own version of red teaming. One of the things that they credit to its success is that the folks who are in that job don't have to be right all the time, because they found that if you judge people, if you say your analysis has to be correct, you can't make a mistake, then you limit their thinking, and they may have something they have 90% confidence in that's really critical for you to hear as a decision maker, but they're not going to share it because they don't have 100% confidence. So giving people not just the space temporally to think, but giving them the space to think. I mean, it's fuzzy logic, right? I mean, fuzzy logic was a huge breakthrough in artificial intelligence. We have to let people apply fuzzy logic too. Fuzzy logic is that you have a probability, you have a high degree of confidence in this decision, but it's not 100%. And that's how machines are able to make such good analyses, because they don't, as long as you tell them they don't have to be 100% accurate, they can apply that. But we often make people feel like they have to be 100% accurate in their decisions, and it's a mistake.
All the time. And it's that constant, as you said, what's your plan? It's good. Is it going to succeed? Yes. Percentage rate, 100%. And you talked about before, rag status. Is your plan red? No, it's green. Are you sure? It looks a bit amber. No, it's green. It's green. Until the last minute, and suddenly it goes red again. And then you get that massive falling off a cliff at the last point when it's often too late to recover. And you can't do that in your world because people die, and it's such a huge responsibility. And changing the way you approach this and the way you're thinking about this differently has got to be the way forward.
Yeah. And I think that, the other thing that this whole process did for me, and for me specifically, is it turned it into a joint learning process. Before me coming up in front and saying the meeting this and asking them questions, it was me with my years of experience helping them understand what they needed to do. And now there's this exchange of information on both sides that helps me understand the problem that they're dealing with, so I can take that back up and work with the leaders to get support for what's going on, to get them to understand what is likely to occur and what we're trying to accomplish and what we think is going to be successful. And, it's just, I think what I heard from both y'all too is that we have this notion that we operate in a closed system,
right?
Sometimes. And that we just think that, all right, we can, all the relevant variables to our success are identified if we're good enough, right? If we're good enough, we know we can put boundaries on what we can expect, and that the only the variables that we have identified are the ones that are going to influence the outcome. And one of the first things I think we've got to do is we've got to realize, hey, this is a real world system. It's not some made up theoretical system.
Right.
We, the outcomes can't be inferred by just individual people's choices. You can be the best guy ever and have a bad day because there's certain things that are beyond your control, and different people interact. And, socially, we were on a fire where we had to deal with armed militia trying to protect their home because they thought the fire was started by Antifa and that they were afraid. This is real, and that they're afraid that they're going to come in there. And then QAnon came and started taking some of the sound bites out of some of the presentations we made and was using them out of context to improve their situation. You never think of having to deal with that in a fire, but it created additional risk,
Right.
Physical risk to the firefighters in the field.
Well, we see this all the time in business, though, too. Businesses. This is probably one of the number one things that I talk about when I'm working with individual companies is that people can come up with a brilliant plan, but they approach the plan as a closed system, like you say, and they'll say, "Wow, look at this. We've looked at all these different variables. We've created this optionality and stuff." And one of the things I always say is, folks, remember, as you're sitting here congratulating yourselves on this beautiful plan that you've created, how do you know that your competitor isn't sitting in a room just like this, drinking stale coffee just like you are, and coming up with their own plan that's going to do something completely different that could obviate this entirely? And the only way that you can execute this with confidence is to execute it with the understanding that it's provisional and that you may have to adapt because things could change. Nobody. I was just talking about this in a class yesterday. If you were sitting, Marcus is gonna feel the pain on this example. If you were a homeowner in Britain 3 months ago and coming up with your annual budget for your house and thinking about how much you're going to pay for natural gas, you would think you had sorted that out, and you'd be sorely wrong now, wouldn't you, Marcus?
Oh yes, to the tune of several £1,000s a year, you'd be out.
Right.
Yeah.
And
100%.
that's an individual. So what if you're a company that needs natural gas? Nobody, I would submit that no company was thinking a year ago about the impact a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine was going to have on their business operations. And yet this is the world we live in today. And folks, it's not going to get any simpler. As all of these things are interconnected, and as one domino topples, it topples two more, and it just becomes this cascading event. And that's why it's become so important to view decision making as an ongoing practice rather than a process that is you do and it's finished and you go on, you fight the fire, you put it out, you go home.
Yeah.
How long did this last fire in the Sierras here in California last, Jayson? It was what? More than 3 months, right?
Yeah, there's been a few fires, especially in California last year, that basically 1/3 of all the resources in the United States were committed to 2 or 3 fires. And yeah, and it's interesting too, because what you're talking about, well, actually what both of you guys talked about there was made me think is that we still need planning tools that reinforce causality minded outcomes, because we, at the end of the day, if we're going to put a spike camp up somewhere, we know we need to get food to those people. We need to do all this kind of stuff. We need to have the support to be able to do it. We can list those out. We should be able to list those out. We know how long people need before they get a day off. We know all this stuff. And so we got to be good at that part. And then we also need to be good at that nonlinear thinking part of it, about how the systems interact with each other. And that that whole principle of prediction, that if we're just good enough, we can predict an outcome. No. And we can't define the root variables of every problem. We can't sit there and go, hey, brush is a great example. At about 60% live fuel moisture, brush is on or it's off. But how much dead it has underneath it, how much the slope, there's a few other different nuanced things, but brush doesn't just gradually get to a point. It doesn't hardly burn, or it's like gasoline on a stick.
Yeah.
And so what do you do there is you need to be more iterative about your decision making, and you need to allow decision space for people in the field to take certain actions based on what occurs on whichever slope they're on that moment, on that day.
Yeah.
And if you try to be predictive about, well, break it down to the things you know about. It's 8-year-old brush. It's got this live fuel moisture. It's on a south-facing aspect. We're at this drought indices, so the soil moisture is probably XYZ. It maybe builds a box, but at the end of the day, you still got to give the decision to that guy that's out in the field.
Distributed decision making.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said as well. It's got to be iterative. And the time frame between those iterations has to be reflective of the environment you're in, the threat you're facing, the individuals. And they've got to have that ownership and accountability of kicking that clock, making it roll and making the decisions as they need to do. And obviously cascading the information of what's going on back upwards and down. But that's got to be the challenge when you're working from region down to the front line of firefighters. How is that information being relayed and those decisions being made at the moment? And do you foresee this is where you wanted to take this, Jayson, with this devolved decision making going as low as possible?
Well, when you synchronize, this is like all Jayson's mistakes. So I used to be, all right, so at this meeting we're gonna do this, at this meeting we're gonna do this, and you got to build a framework, and it's good. But the meeting isn't the success. That's effort put towards something that's successful. It's making sure that people are synchronized so they know, so we know what's going on in the field, and they know what they can do. That varies based on how much the environment's changing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're making a budget 2 years ago to predict inflation over the next 2 years, or you're making one right now, I bet if you had a choice, you would synchronize to the whatever relevant factors made up that decision more frequently now than you would have 2 years ago.
Right.
And that's something that when we don't spend and I honestly don't think we spend enough time teaching people these skill sets, because the first thing we teach people is all this very linear stuff, because it's the process stuff. It's the basic trainings. It's all that kind of thing, which is, has a role. Before you start leading anybody, you need to get better at the other part. You need to get better at the nuance. And it shouldn't take 10 years to get better at it because you have to go through all these practical problem-solving efforts. We should be creating an environment that makes it easier for people to get better at it more quickly.
Yeah.
And that highlights those critical thinking skills that aren't intrinsic to the basic day-to-day job.
If I had my way, some people often tell us, gosh, you guys should teach college classes on red team thinking. We have. I used to teach a class on this at Haas School of Business at Berkeley. Guest lecturer right now at National University of Singapore. Marcus, you can guest lectures at Warwick Business School in the UK. But my response is always, honestly, this stuff needs to be taught in secondary school. This is where it has to begin, because there isn't a job today that doesn't need applied critical thinking, that doesn't need to understand the impact that cognitive biases have on our decision making. It couldn't benefit from just a little bit of understanding about how decisions are made, how they can be made poorly, how they can be made better. I think it's just a basic life skill now. And it used to be taught in at least some schools, but not for a long time, not for decades, honestly. And it's something that if I could wave a magic wand, I just make part of the curriculum of every secondary school program in the world.
You could go the model that I had, which is have a dad who's in special forces. And I failed to appreciate all the different times when he would challenge me about things and make me explain why I thought something and why my viewpoint. It wasn't like I had to be wrong, but he wanted me to explain why I felt that way and why I had that viewpoint. And, is there anything else that could be true? Is there any other possible causes that you haven't considered? And he wouldn't say it that way, but he would make me think about it.
Yeah.
And to this day, when we have conversations about stuff, even when I'm working on my doctorate, I'm like, I better be squared away when I talk to him about this, because he'll ask probing questions. And that's just the way it was around the Coil household. And that works out. But you're right. You don't just get there. You don't you got to practice it, and you got to be persistent, and you have to recognize what your culture did that was good and what your culture did that removed uncertainty where it shouldn't have been removed. And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now is people, they're in a group, oh, this must be that, cause and effect. And I don't know. it's complex. I mean, it's
Hugely complex.
It's complex, but it's
Yeah.
simple. It's first principles, like you say, and that's why, start young. I love it. Yeah, we should all have the benefit of that sort of perspective in our youth.
Yeah. I remember the best teachers, going back to your dad, Jason, the best teachers I had, they'd come and sit on the desk next to you. You've done all your stuff, your workings or whatever it is you're building or writing. And the best ones used to say, they'd say, Marcus, talk me through your thinking on that one. Not show me what you did. Talk me through your thinking. And I used to sit there and think, yeah, and then you'd have to explain the thought process you went through. And then dissecting that and really helping you understand what your brain was thinking and doing as you went through step by step, really solidified the understanding of what you were trying to achieve and how you'd done it and how you could do it differently at a different time and how it worked well or how it failed. But it's that understanding how you are physically thinking and then also understanding how others around you are thinking.
Right.
It's that situational awareness, it's self-awareness, but it's awareness of others. Because as you said, Jason, numerous times, there's many pieces in this puzzle. Social, environmental, people, and the different crew on a different day will have a different outcome. And understanding all of that, and the more you can align people and bring that clarity together, I think is one of the biggest and toughest jobs of leadership today in any environment.
Absolutely. Well, this is great stuff, guys. We could talk forever about this, but unfortunately, our time is up. Jayson, we'll have you back on, continue the conversation in the future. Thanks for joining us. Tune in next time. Be Bryce and Marcus talking.
Indeed.
But we'll love to have you join us. Take care.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to Red Team TV, sponsored by Red Team Thinking. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and notification icon below so you don't miss the next idea-filled episode. If you prefer to listen on the go, subscribe to Bryce and Marcus's podcast, The Thinking Leader, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. And don't forget to visit redteamthinking.com to learn more about Red Team Thinking work and Marcus and Bryce's upcoming online courses. While you're there, take our free quiz to find out how you rate as a Red Team thinker and if your organisation has a Red Team culture. Because who thinks wins.